My name is Elliot Marsh. I am 63 years old, a retired forensic accountant living in Columbus, Ohio. I spent 34 years following the money. Paper trails, shell accounts, fraudulent invoices. I've seen every way a person can hide the truth inside a number. I thought I was done with all that when I handed in my badge and cleaned out my desk. I was wrong. For 4 years, I had not heard my son's voice, not on his birthday, not on his birthday, not on Christmas, not when my wife of 31 years, Pauline, was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer, and I sat alone in a hospital waiting room at 6 in the morning with nobody to call. 4 years of silence from my only child, my son, Owen, and I had made my peace with it. Or I told myself I had. Then one Tuesday in March, I came home from the hardware store to find something sitting on my front porch, not in the mailbox. On the porch. A small brown cardboard package, maybe the size of a shoebox, wrapped in packing tape and addressed in handwriting I would know anywhere. Owen's handwriting, deliberate, slightly left-leaning, the way I taught him to hold a pencil when he was 7 years old. I stood there on my own front porch, holding it like it was something fragile. Pauline came to the screen door when she heard me on the steps, and she saw my face before she saw the box. "Elliot," she said, "what is it?" I couldn't answer. I just held it up. She pushed the door open. She looked at the handwriting. Her hand went to her mouth. We both knew the last time we'd seen Owen was at a restaurant here in Columbus. His wife, Shayna, had arranged it. We had not chosen Shayna. Had arranged it. We had not chosen Shayna. Shayna had chosen herself. She swept into Owen's life during his second year at Ohio State, beautiful and electric and always just slightly ahead of whatever room she walked into. I shook her hand the first time we met, and I noticed 3 things. She didn't look at Pauline once during the entire dinner. She corrected Owen twice in public and smiled while she did it, and she asked about our house, specifically whether we owned it outright or still carried a mortgage. I am a forensic accountant. I notice things. We went to that last dinner 4 years ago because she had something to tell us. Owen had accepted a position with a private investment firm out of Scottsdale, Arizona. They were moving in 2 weeks. Owen looked at the table while she said it. She looked at me while she said it. The position, she was careful to call it an opportunity, required his full focus. She said that word, focus, the way people say it when they mean something else entirely. Then she folded her napkin and said she hoped we understood that starting fresh meant starting fresh, and that Owen would be in touch when things settled. Owen said nothing. He reached for his water glass. That was the last time I saw my son. I brought the box inside. Pauline sat at the kitchen table. I sat across from her. We both looked at it the way you look at something you want and are afraid of at the same time. "Open it," she finally said. I went to the junk drawer and got the box cutter. I did not tear at the packing tape. I am a methodical man. I sliced along each seam, careful, deliberate, like I was opening evidence. Inside the box was a layer of brown packing paper. Underneath that, a bundle of items wrapped in a dish towel. A dish towel I recognized immediately. It had a pattern of small blue roosters on it. It was from the set Pauline's mother had given us when we first got married. We'd had 6 of them once. Over 30 years, we'd lost 5 of them to normal life, spills, moves, time. The last one had disappeared when Owen went off to college. He'd taken it, probably without thinking, the way young men take small pieces of home without realizing they're doing it. He had kept it all these years. Pauline made a sound I had not heard from her before, not quite a word, just a breath, broken. I unwrapped the dish towel. Inside were 4 things. A Polaroid photograph of Owen at maybe age 10, fishing at Alum Creek, holding up a bluegill with both hands and grinning so hard his eyes were nearly shut. A folded piece of paper from a legal pad. A USB drive. And a check. The check was made out to me. Elliot Marsh, in the amount of $43. That was a specific number. An odd, specific, unremarkable number. My retired accountant brain flagged it immediately. $43 means nothing unless it means something. I unfolded the legal pad paper last. It was Owen's handwriting, but it was not Owen's cadence. It was stiff. It was careful in the wrong places and sloppy in the right ones. It said that he and Shayna were doing well, that Scottsdale was wonderful, that they hoped Pauline and I were in good health, that he thought of us often, that he wanted us to know there were no hard feelings, No hard feelings. My son had not spoken to me in 4 years. He had missed his mother's cancer diagnosis, her surgery, her recovery, and he was telling us there were no hard feelings. I looked at that phrase the way I used to look at a balance sheet that doesn't add up. Something is wrong here. Somewhere in these numbers, someone is lying. Pauline pointed at the check. Why $43? I didn't answer. I turned it over in my hands. On the back, in very small print, almost too small to read. Owen had always had small, precise handwriting when he wanted to hide something in plain sight. He'd been doing it since he was a teenager, leaving notes he didn't want found. On the back, in that small print, were 2 words. Tax year. I'm a forensic accountant. I spent 34 years following paper trails, and my son had just handed me one. Tax year. Not a greeting. Not a clue about feelings or locations. A technical term. A filing term. My mind started moving the way it used to move when I sat down with a stack of ledgers at 7 in the morning. Pauline, I said, call your sister, tell her you're coming for the week. She looked at me. I don't want you here while I figure this out, I said, and I don't want Shayna to know that we're figuring anything out. Pauline held my eyes for a long moment. Then she nodded. She understood without asking because she has always understood me that way. 31 years of marriage and she still reads me faster than I can speak. But she said one more thing before she went to pack her bag. The USB drive, Elliot. Don't forget the USB drive. I hadn't touched it yet. I picked it up. Small, black, no label. I went to my study, a room I'd converted from a spare bedroom when I retired. Nothing fancy. A desk and a monitor and a filing cabinet I couldn't bring myself to get rid of. And I plugged it in. One file. A PDF. 61 pages. I opened it and I felt the air in the room change. It was a tax return. Or rather, it was a collection of tax returns, federal and state, filed jointly by Owen Marsh and Shayna Delacroix Marsh over the past 3 years. I didn't know how Owen had gotten copies. I didn't ask myself that yet. I just read. I read for 2 hours without stopping. I made notes on a legal pad in the shorthand I'd used for 30 years, and by the time I reached page 61, I had a very clear picture of what my son had sent me. Shayna was not a wife. She was a construction project. She had been before marrying Owen, a licensed financial advisor in the state of Florida. Licensed and then suspended by FINRA for undisclosed conflicts of interest in 2019. She had relocated to Ohio, met Owen, married him inside of 14 months, which is fast, but not so fast that a young man in love would notice. The returns showed joint income, Owen's salary from the firm in Scottsdale, and a secondary income stream listed as consulting fees, her consulting fees channeled through an LLC registered in Delaware that I could find no business record for beyond its filing date. Delaware LLCs are legal. They're also the favored shell of every financial predator I'd ever put in front of a federal prosecutor. But that wasn't what stopped my blood cold. What stopped my blood cold was a line item I found on page 47, buried in a Schedule E attachment, a rental property. A property I didn't know my son owned. A condo in Tempe, Arizona, purchased 3 years ago. Purchased using a down payment that came from a gift. A gift from Elliot and Pauline Marsh. We had given no such gift. I sat in my study and I let that settle for about 30 seconds. Then I picked up my phone and called the one person I needed to call. A woman named Claudette Webb. We came up together at the Ohio Department of Taxation 30 years ago. She went federal, IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and retired 6 months after I did. She's the sharpest person I know, and she does not answer her phone before 9 in the morning. But she answered on the second ring, which told me she was already up. Claudette, I said, I have a Schedule E problem. Send me what you have, she said. There were no pleasantries. There never are with Claudette. That's why I called her. I forwarded the PDF. She called me back in 40 minutes. Elliot, she said, there's a fraudulent gift letter in here, signed with your name. Someone created a forged document claiming you gifted Owen $52,000 for a real estate purchase. That's mortgage fraud. Federal. I closed my eyes. And then I made myself think, not as a father, as an accountant. Why would Shayna need a fraudulent gift letter? Because she needed to show the mortgage lender that the down payment was a gift, not a loan, so it wouldn't appear as a liability on Owen's debt-to-income ratio. Standard move. Except it required forging my signature on a federal document, and it put my name, my professional name, my retired federal employee name on a piece of mortgage fraud. But Owen sent me this. Owen packaged this up and left it on my porch, which meant Owen had found it, which meant Owen was in trouble, and he knew it. And he knew that if he sent it directly, if he called me or emailed me or came to the door, she would find out. The dish towel. The specific amount of $43. Tax year written on the back of a check like a receipt reference code. My son had not sent me a box. He had sent me a case file. He had sent it the way a man sends a distress signal when he knows the room he's in has ears. There was something else, too. Something I almost missed because I was focused on the financial documents. The Polaroid. I had looked at it and felt only grief. That gap-toothed 10-year-old boy at Alum Creek. But when I picked it up again, I noticed it. On the back of the Polaroid in pencil, so light it was nearly invisible, a 10-digit number. I stared at it. I'm a man who has spent a career understanding that numbers don't appear by accident. It was not a phone number. I checked the format. It was not a social security number. It was not an account number I recognized. I turned it over and looked at the photo again. Alum Creek. Owen at 10. Fishing. And then I had it. When Owen was in middle school, he kept a journal. Not a diary, a field journal, like a naturalist. He cataloged everything he observed outdoors. He numbered every entry. He showed it to me once and told me the numbering system he used. Month, day, year, entry number. That 10-digit number on the back of the Polaroid was a date and an entry number. He still had the journal. Or he had told me where to find it. I went to the basement. We have a storage room down there, shelves of boxes from 30 years of accumulated life. Owen's boxes were in the back corner, the ones we'd kept when he left for college, the ones we'd never been able to throw away. It took me 20 minutes to find the right one. Inside, under a stack of baseball cards and 2 broken video game controllers, was a green hardcover field journal with his name on the inside cover in a 12-year-old's handwriting. Entry 047. I flipped to it. It was a page from when he was 14. He'd written about a great blue heron he'd spotted at a pond near his friend's house. But tucked inside that page, folded into quarters, was a single index card. On the index card, in his adult handwriting, were 3 things: a storage unit number, a facility name I recognized, a place on Morse Road, about 6 miles from our house, and a 4-digit code. My son had come home. He'd been here. He'd come while we weren't home, or he'd waited until he knew we were gone, and he had left me a trail of breadcrumbs so specific and so personal that only his father, the accountant who taught him to hide things in numbers, would ever follow it. I called Claudette back. "I need you to come with me," I said. "I need a witness when I open a storage unit." She asked no questions. She said she'd be there in an hour. The unit was a 10 by 10, climate-controlled, half full. Boxes, a folding table, a plastic bin, everything labeled in Shayna's handwriting except one box in the back, labeled, in Owen's hand, simply, "Tax records, do not discard." Inside that box was the rest of it. 3 years of bank statements from an account I'd never seen, an account in Owen's name that he clearly did not control, because the signature card had been amended, co-signatory added, about 6 months after they were married. Regular transfers out of that account to the Delaware LLC. Transfers timed specifically to avoid the $10,000 reporting threshold, always $9,800, $9,750, $9,900. Structuring. A federal crime. There was also a folder. Inside the folder was a life insurance policy. Owen Marsh, insured. Policy opened 14 months ago. Beneficiary, Shauna Delacroix Marsh. $2 million payout. I have been a professional reader of financial documents for 34 years. I have testified in federal court 14 times. I have sat across from some very cold, very calculated people. I stood in that storage unit with a flashlight in my hand, and I felt something I had not felt in years. Fear. Not for myself, for my son. Claudette was reading over my shoulder. She said quietly, "Elliot, the structuring alone is federal. But that policy," "I know," I said. "This isn't just fraud," she said. "I know. I took photographs of every document with my phone. We left the unit exactly as we found it." I drove home. I sat in my study and I pulled out a fresh legal pad and I wrote at the top, "Project Recovery." Then I listed what I had. Forged gift letter bearing my name. Mortgage fraud, federal. Fraudulent consulting income through a Delaware shell. Potential tax fraud and money laundering. Structuring of transfers to avoid reporting thresholds. Federal crime. Life insurance policy. $2 million, 14 months old, and a son who had come home in secret to leave me a trail, which meant a son who was afraid, who could not ask for help out loud, who was being watched closely enough that he couldn't make a phone call or send an email. I did not go to Owen directly. I'm a methodical man, and I know that you do not disturb the scene before you have the evidence secured. If Shayna found out that Owen had made contact, I didn't know what she would do. But a woman who opens a $2 million life insurance policy on her husband and runs structuring transactions out of his bank account is not a woman who reacts predictably to losing control. I called Claudette. I gave her what she needed to make a quiet inquiry through her former contacts at IRSCI. Not an official referral yet, just a name check. She called me back the next morning. "Elliot," she said, "Shayna Delacroix has a prior. Not just the FINRA suspension. There was a civil judgment against her in Broward County, Florida 7 years ago. Wrongful death suit. Her first husband, he died in a hiking accident 18 months into their marriage. The suit was filed by his family. It was settled out of court. She kept the life insurance payout, $800,000. I put the phone down on my desk and I sat there for a very long time. Pauline was at her sister's. I was alone in the house where I raised my son. I looked at the Polaroid I'd taken from the box, that 10-year-old boy with his bluegill and his gap-toothed grin, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The 4 years of silence, the Christmas mornings, the empty chair at Thanksgiving, his mother's surgery, and the waiting room at 6 a.m. I let myself feel it, and then I folded it up and put it away, because I am an accountant and I know that emotion is not evidence. Emotion is what you let yourself have when the job is done. The job was not done. I needed a lawyer. Not a tax lawyer, not a family lawyer. I needed a lawyer who understood federal financial crime. I'd worked with one for 12 years during my career. A woman who ran a boutique firm here in Columbus, specializing in white-collar criminal defense and, increasingly, prosecution support. Her name was Iris Tanner. She was 61, relentless, and had once told a federal judge during a hearing that his understanding of constructive fraud was, quote, impressively incomplete. I called her on a Thursday afternoon. "Elliot," she said, "this had better be interesting." "It is," I said. I told her everything. She asked 3 questions, and none of them were about Owen. They were all about the documents. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I need originals of the bank statements and a certified copy of that insurance policy." "Can you get the certified copy without alerting her?" I asked. "Watch me," she said. Iris had the certified copy by Friday afternoon. She had an old contact at the county recorder's office who understood the meaning of quiet and professional. I delivered the bank statements. I had already photographed them, and I returned to the storage unit with Claudette to photograph each page a second time with a better light source. We did not remove anything from the unit. I know how evidence works. You document, you do not disturb. Iris filed a motion in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas on Monday morning. Not a divorce proceeding, not a civil complaint. A motion for emergency asset freeze based on evidence of ongoing financial fraud, the structuring transactions, the forged gift letter, the shell company, citing risk of dissipation. She also forwarded the complete file to a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in the Columbus field office. She called me when it was filed. "Elliot," she said, "the asset freeze will hit Tuesday morning, every account tied to the LLC, and every joint account, including the one with the structuring. She will not be able to move money." "What about Owen?" I said. "If she can't access the money, she'll know something's happened. I don't want him in that house when she finds out." "That's your job," she said. "I've done my part. You need to get your son out of that house before Tuesday." She was right. 4 days of planning, and it came down to this. I had to reach Owen without Shayna knowing. I did not call his cell phone. Shayna monitored his cell phone. I was certain of that now. I did not email him. I did not send anything to the house. I drove to Scottsdale. I did not tell Pauline. I drove to the airport. I bought a ticket with cash at the counter, and I flew to Scottsdale, Arizona. I took a cab to the neighborhood where Owen worked. I knew the name of the firm. It was on the tax returns. I sat in a coffee shop across the street from the building at 7:30 in the morning, and I waited. At 8:14, I saw him. He was thinner than I remembered. He walked with his head slightly down, the way a person walks when they've been trained not to draw attention to themselves. He was wearing a gray jacket that was slightly too large for him now, and he was carrying a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, And he was not looking at the phone. He was walking with it like a prop, like a thing he'd been told to carry. I stepped out of the coffee shop, and I said, "Owen." He stopped. He turned, and the look on his face was the most complicated thing I have ever seen another person's face do. Terror and relief and guilt and love and exhaustion all moving across his features at the same moment, the way light changes on water. "Dad," he said. His voice was barely there. "I know," I said. "I got your package." He looked around. He actually looked around. The reflex, automatic, the behavior of a person who has been conditioned to check whether they're being observed. "She can't know I'm here," he said. "She won't," I said. "But I need 10 minutes. Can you go back into that building and tell them you forgot something?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. We sat in the corner booth in that coffee shop, and Owen told me things he'd been carrying for 3 years. He told me how it had started, the monitoring of his phone, the separation from friends, the way she would reframe every conversation he had with me or his mother until it became evidence of our manipulation. He told me about the bank account, how she had added herself as co-signer by presenting a document he'd signed believing it was something else, a refinancing form. He told me he had found the insurance policy 6 months ago in a folder she didn't know he could access, and that he had understood in that moment exactly what he was looking at. He had gone looking for the rest of it and found it, and then he had not known what to do because he was afraid and because he did not know if I would believe him and because she had spent 3 years methodically convincing him that I was the enemy. "I believe you," I said. "I have always believed you." He looked at the table. "The way she talked about you," he said. "I knew it wasn't right, but she's very good at making you doubt. She's very good at finding the version of the story that makes you feel like you're the problem." "I know," I said. "I've interviewed 100 people like her. I know what they do, and I know how they do it." He finally looked up. "Is it over?" he asked. I said, "Tuesday morning, every account she controls gets frozen by court order. By Tuesday afternoon, the FBI field office will have the complete file Iris Tanner has prepared. There is forged documentation bearing my name. There is 3 years of federal structuring violations, and there was a prior civil judgment from Florida involving a prior husband who died under circumstances that will now receive a great deal of professional attention." Owen went very still. "The life insurance policy," I said. "I found it." He looked at me, and I could see the moment he understood that I had not just found evidence of fraud, I had found evidence of something much worse, and that I had come to Scottsdale not just to save his money, but to save him. "I need you to go home from work today like it's a normal Tuesday," I said. "I need you to behave exactly as you always do until Monday night. Monday night, when she's asleep. I need you to take your passport and your social security card and your personal laptop and nothing else, and I need you to walk out of that house, and I will be parked on the street 2 blocks away." He stared at me. "Dad, she'll notice. She'll know. By the time she notices," I said, "the accounts will be frozen and Iris Tanner will have already messengered a letter to the house. She's not going to chase you, Owen. She's going to need a lawyer." He was quiet for a long time. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I've been so ashamed," he said finally. His voice cracked on the word. "I've been so ashamed that I let this happen. I know what you did for a living. I know you saw her for what she was from the beginning, and I didn't listen, and I didn't listen, and I put my hand on his arm. "You are my son," I said. "That is the only thing that matters to me. The rest of it is just paperwork." He laughed. A short, wet sound. And for just a second, he was the boy in the Polaroid. I flew back to Columbus. I did not sleep well. I told Pauline on Sunday. I drove to her sister's house 3 hours away, and I sat at their kitchen table and I told her everything. She sat very still while I talked. She did not cry until I got to the part about the life insurance policy. Then she cried quietly for a few minutes, then she stopped, and she asked me one question. "Is he coming home?" "Yes," I said. She nodded. She folded her hands on the table. "Then let's get ready." Monday night. I was parked on a quiet street in Scottsdale at 1:15 in the morning. It was 68 degrees, warm for March, and the street was completely dark except for a few porch lights. I sat in a rental car and I waited. At 1:40, I saw him. Walking fast, no luggage, just a backpack, his jacket half-zipped, his breath visible in the dry night air. He got in the passenger seat and I pulled away from the curb before he'd even closed the door. He didn't say anything for the first few minutes. Neither did I. We just drove toward the highway. Then he said, I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter. I nodded. I didn't want to take it, he said. But I didn't want to throw it away either. I didn't want it in my pocket. That seemed right to me, I said. We drove to the airport. I had booked the tickets days earlier. On Tuesday morning, at 9:17 a.m., Iris Tanner's motion was granted in full. Every account tied to the Delaware LLC, every joint account, the real estate account, all of it frozen pending investigation. At 9:40, a process server knocked on the door of the house in Scottsdale. Shayna answered it. She received the notice of the asset freeze and, enclosed with it, Iris Tanner's letter advising that the evidence package had been forwarded to IRS Criminal Investigation and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, Columbus Division. At 10:02, Shayna attempted to access the joint bank account from her phone. At 10:04, she attempted the LLC account. At 10:09, she called Owen's cell phone. I know this because Owen was sitting at my kitchen table in Columbus at 10:09. And I watched him look at his phone and decline the call. He set it face down on the table. Pauline set a cup of coffee in front of him. She put her hand on his shoulder for a moment, and then she went back to the counter without saying anything. She understood. We sat in that kitchen, the three of us, for a long time. The morning light was coming through the window over the sink, the kind of light that makes everything look very ordinary and very good at the same time. Owen had both hands around his coffee mug. He was looking at the table. He said finally, I found the dish towel in a box I'd brought from school. I'd had it for years and I'd never thought about why I kept it. When I knew I needed to tell you something, I didn't know how to do it safely, and I thought I knew you'd recognize it. I knew you'd understand that I was there, that I'd been home. Pauline made a sound behind us at the counter. She covered it quickly. I looked at my son. He was thin and tired, and he had 4 years of complicated living behind his eyes. But they were his eyes. The ones I recognized. You set me a good case file, I said. He almost smiled. He learned from the best. 3 weeks later, a federal grand jury in the Southern District of Ohio returned an indictment. Shayna Delacora Marsh was charged with wire fraud, mortgage fraud, and structuring, 17 counts in total. Her attorney negotiated a surrender. She turned herself in on a Tuesday morning in April. The Broward County authorities in Florida reopened the investigation into her first husband's death. Owen stayed with us while the legal process moved forward. He slept in his old room for the first time in 7 years. He ate breakfast at our kitchen table. He was quiet for a long time, the way people are quiet when they've been loud inside their own heads for too long. Pauline got him back into therapy. She knew a counselor, a good one, and she made the appointment and drove him herself the first time, and then stayed in the parking lot because she didn't want him to have to drive home alone afterward. I gave him space. I did not ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. I am an accountant. I understand that some reconciliations require a longer audit period than others. One evening, a month or so after everything, we were sitting on the back porch after dinner. The sun was going down over the neighbor's roof, and the yard was doing the thing it does in early spring, where everything is green in a way that seems almost aggressive. Owen had a beer. I had a glass of water. He said, I keep thinking about how you knew. From the moment you opened the box, how you just knew what to do with it. I said, I had 34 years of practice following the money. He was quiet. Then he said, no, I mean you knew I needed help before you even looked at the documents, when you saw the dish towel. I thought about that for a moment. I said, you are my son. I know your handwriting. I know how you think. A father doesn't need 34 years of training to recognize when his child is asking for help. He just has to be paying attention. Owen nodded slowly. He looked out at the yard. I should have reached out sooner, he said. There were times I almost did. 100 times. I know, I said. I'm sorry, he said, for the 4 years. For your mother's. I wasn't there when she was sick, and I know, I said. She knows. Will she? She already has, I said. He was. She already has, I said. He was quiet again for a long moment. The money, he said, the accounts she drained, the condo, all of it. That's gone, isn't it? Even with the freeze, a lot of that is probably, I said. He nodded. He wasn't asking me to fix it. He was just being honest about what it cost him to get out. You can rebuild money, I said. You cannot rebuild time. The only currency that actually runs out is the years. Everything else is a ledger entry. You can always rebalance a ledger. He looked at me. That is the most accountant thing you have ever said to me, he said. I said, I know. He laughed, and this time it was real, not wet, not short. Just a laugh coming up from somewhere that had been closed for a long time. Pauline appeared in the doorway behind us, with a look on her face that she always tries to hide and never manages to. She'd heard him laugh. She went back inside quickly so he wouldn't see her crying. I sat on my back porch with my son, and I watched the light go out of the yard, and I thought about the dish towel with the blue roosters, and the Polaroid, and the green field journal in the basement, and the 10-digit number so light in pencil it was almost not there. I thought about the 34 years I spent following money trails, and how I never once imagined the most important trail I would ever follow would end here, on this porch, with the most ordinary and irreplaceable thing in the world, my son. Home. If you're a parent sitting with a silence you don't know how to cross, or a child who doesn't know how to ask for help without words, I want you to know this. The people who love you are paying attention. They know your handwriting. They know what you would keep after all these years, and why. You don't always have to say it out loud. Sometimes you just have to trust that the trail you leave behind you is one they know how to follow. Hit that like button if this story stayed with you. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you found that box on your porch? I think about cause and effect a lot these days. I spent 34 years in forensic accounting, and the whole job is built on one simple truth. Every outcome has a paper trail. Nothing happens without a reason. Nothing disappears without leaving a mark somewhere. You just have to know where to look. Shayna didn't become who she was overnight. She made 100 small choices, one after another, each one a little worse than the last, until those choices added up to something that could not be undone. She built a life out of control and deception, and she believed, the way people like her always believe, that she was smarter than everyone around her. That's the thing about people who prey on others through manipulation. They always underestimate the ones they've decided don't matter. She looked at me and saw a retired old man who would be too proud or too confused to act. She looked at Owen and saw a resource, not a person. That kind of arrogance is always the crack in the foundation. Owen made choices too. I don't say that to assign blame. I say it because it's true, and he knows it. And the night he sat at my kitchen table with his hands around a coffee mug, he said it himself. He chose to stop listening. He chose to believe that the distance from his family was something he had decided rather than something that was being decided for him. That is one of the cruelest things a manipulative person does. They make their control feel like your own free will. And Owen, to his credit, is someone who had the courage to eventually recognize what had happened, even when that recognition cost him nearly everything. What I keep coming back to is this. He came home. Even when he couldn't say it out loud. Even when he couldn't say it out loud. Even when he couldn't pick up a phone, he found a way. A dish towel with blue roosters. A Polaroid from Alum Creek. $43 and 2 words in small print. He used the language that only the two of us shared, built from 30 years of a father and son paying attention to each other. That's not luck. That's what happens when you invest in knowing a person, really knowing them, over the long run. The returns show up when you need them most. I think the hardest thing about watching your child suffer is the helplessness of it. The feeling that your love, which is enormous, cannot cross the distance that someone else has manufactured between you. But I learned that love without discipline is just emotion. It feels real, but it doesn't build anything. What got Owen out of that house was not just that I loved him. It was that I paid attention, that I followed the trail carefully, that I made a plan and executed it without letting grief override my judgment. Emotion tells you what matters. Intelligence tells you what to do about it. And the willingness to actually do it. To buy the ticket, and sit in the coffee shop and wait. That's the part that nobody talks about enough. That's the part that actually changes things. If you are sitting with a silence that you don't know how to break, I want to tell you something I believe in my bones. The people who have earned your trust are not finished with you. They are paying attention in ways you may not see. And if you can find even the smallest way to leave them a trail, they will follow it. That is what love that has been tested actually looks like. Not loud, not perfect, just steady and still bare, and paying attention. What would you have done if that package arrived on your porch? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, hit that like button.